Good morning, everyone, and welcome back to Tactics Board. I'm sure there are many Norwich City fans still recovering from the last few minutes against Cardiff, but the Championship machine rolls on and the Canaries travel to Sheffield Wednesday tomorrow. You know the drill here. We're going to take a look at the game from a strategic point of view. I'm going to give you my predicted starting 11 for it. And then later on, we're going to take a look at Josh Sargent, how big a miss he'll be and how tactically his loss affects them, with the injury list growing, of course. But we're going to start with that starting 11. So here's the team I think Torop will choose for tomorrow's game. So I've gone for George Long in goal, Kellen Fisher at right back, Shane Duffy and Jose Cordoba in the centre of defence, with Callum Doyle at left back, a midfield of Jakob Sorensen, Gabriel Forsyth and Emiliano Marcondes, with Oscar Schwartau on the right, Borja Sainz on the left and Ante Cianats through the middle. Up front, you'll notice there are no changes there, and part of that is the fact that Torop doesn't really have much to choose from. Of course, we'll come on to Sargent, but he's also missing Anis Ben Sulemane, Marcelino Nunez, Kenny McLean through suspension, Angus Gunn, a couple of others around the fringes of the squad as well. It is becoming a real problem, but Torop is someone who likes to keep a similar group from game to game. We don't tend to see loads of changes from him, and even after losing the game so late against Cardiff, I'd be surprised if he made too many changes. There could be one or two, but I think it maybe will be the same 11 from that game, because actually the performance up until he had to make substitutions was really, really good. We spoke to him after the game, of course, and he was really positive about that performance. And I think anyone would pinpoint those substitutions as where it went wrong, especially when the likes of Sorensen went off, when Grant Hanley and Emmanuel Forsen came onto the pitch. That was when it seemed to get a little bit too negative and Cardiff were able to easily get up the pitch. And actually, I think with this 11, there were plenty of positive signs that Norwich will be keen to take into Sheffield Wednesday. I suppose there's a conversation to be had around fullback. Jack Stacey looked pretty good, and Ben Krezene maybe is a more traditional option than Callum Doyle, who I actually thought improved a little bit from his previous games. Cardiff have strength out wide, and it looked like that could be a worry for Norwich. But actually, he stood up to the test better than maybe he has out wide in the last few games. Did well against Ollie Tanner, and actually it was when he went into midfield and into a central role that Norwich started to struggle, really. And it looks like maybe they've tweaked a couple of things that will help him defend against Sheffield Wednesday, who we'll come on to, but are particularly strong out wide. So that's something they'll need to focus on. But I think Torop will maybe go for continuity based on the fact that Doyle did seem to improve, especially his defensive performance on the left side of that defence against Cardiff. So I think it may well be the same 11. If there are changes, then probably only one or two. But I think we're going to see another example of the fact that Torop likes to keep things similar and he likes to see a rhythm in his team. Coming on to Sheffield Wednesday, and they're actually a really interesting team and quite a good team to watch when they get things right. They're fairly direct, although it isn't aimless as a lot of teams tend to do it. It isn't just chipped balls into the striker or looking to get it forward at the first available opportunity. They do like to keep it on the floor where possible, but it's always about getting it forward up, completing those attacks as quickly as possible. And that's when Sheffield Wednesday have been at their best, particularly in wide areas. They like to overload on particular sides. They get the ball out wide, and then usually the central midfielder and the fullback goes and joins the winger, and they create numerical superiority, or they drag people out of position and create that space inside. So that's something Norwich will need to be wary of. The wingers will have to work very hard defensively. That's probably where having Oscar Schwartau in that role would be an advantage for Norwich. Sainz is someone who I think has been improving his defensive output, always has that hunger, but maybe positionally still needs to be a little bit better. So there's a bit of pressure on him to go and do that. But there are ways that Norwich can get at Sheffield Wednesday as well. They leave a lot of space in behind because they're a high pressing team. So in a way, it's the sort of test that Norwich like. They like when teams leave space in behind them and they can draw them in and then pass around them quickly and find those players in behind. And we saw in Wednesday's 6-2 loss to Watford at the weekend that there is that space there. They were susceptible to balls in behind. I think Bayo scored from a couple of those, and they won a couple of penalties from those as well. So if Norwich can progress the ball quickly and get the balls into those areas when they have the opportunity, then you've got the likes of Sainz, you've got the likes of Sienats and Schwartau as well, who all are pretty good athletic runners, will like to be in that space. You've got Marcondes in midfield who will do a similar job. And if they can get the ball into those areas quickly, then you feel there is an opportunity for them there. But plenty of threat from the Owls. They will, of course, be very keen to make up for that damaging loss to Watford at the weekend. And there are ways that they can hurt Norwich as well. I think the fullbacks are in for a real test. I talked about Callum Doyle's progress, and I think that's actually a really good sign going into this one, because if maybe he was in poor form and there were the same weaknesses against Cardiff that there seemed to be in the few games going into that, then you would be really worried. But I think Doyle has made improvements. On the other side, you've got Kellen Fisher, who defensively is always pretty strong. And in those wide areas, Norwich are probably in a decent position, but they'll have to be very switched on. The midfielders will have to be willing to probably go into areas they don't really want to, and Norwich will want to dominate the ball so that they don't spend too much time dealing with Sheffield Wednesday's fairly idiosyncratic system and trying to adapt to the way that they play, because of course they play that way every week. Norwich play their own way, and if they end up playing too much of the sort of game that the home side will want, then that will be a problem for them. But tactically, ways they can still get at the hosts, even if they do have strengths that they'll be very keen to show off after that loss against the Hornets. Now, I wanted to finish with a section on Josh Sargent after he sustained a groin injury that looks like it's keeping him out indefinitely. Johannes Torup wasn't especially optimistic in his diagnosis post-match, and it does look like something Norwich may have to deal with for a little while. And I think we all know the headline-grabbing individual qualities that Sargent brings, the goal-scoring, the assists, the sort of talismanic quality. But tactically, he's also quite a big loss for a number of reasons. Out of possession, that's mainly the pressing, and he almost gives Norwich a bit of a head start. And yes, it's difficult for a striker to be winning the ball off the centre-backs all the time or dispossessing the goalkeeper, as he did before he got that injury actually in that Huddersfield game last season. But what he does is he puts those defenders under pressure immediately, and then when usually they pass to the fullback or a central midfielder, whoever receives that pass is under pressure quickly from one of Sargent's teammates, because if you can put that centre-back under pressure, then their pass to the right-back might not be that great, but Sainz has a better chance of getting in there and winning the ball off him. And if he can't win that ball, then usually the right-back is under a lot of pressure to then find a pass after that. So Sargent really starts a whole chain of pressing, and he is a big part of Norwich being able to win the ball back as quickly as possible, which, as I'm sure we all know by now, is a big part of the Torup philosophy. So they've lost a lot in that department tactically. On the ball, he also brings a lot, not only running in behind and the benefits that there can be from that. We spoke about Sheffield Wednesday and how vulnerable they are to those balls in behind, and maybe this is a game that he would be able to profit from. But even when he isn't the one receiving those balls or scoring goals one-on-one, he actually creates the space for his teammates. And a couple of weeks ago, we spoke about Norwich's backline and how they need to communicate effectively to push forward at the right times and drop off at the right times. What you want as a defensive unit is a condensed team, and Sargent really does sort of stop teams from doing that, because the defenders would like ideally to push up almost as high as the halfway line so that their forward players can press as high as possible and put the pressure on those Norwich players when they're trying to play out. But also, they've got to think about Sargent running in behind. And if you've got a striker with that reputation, with that pace, with that physical ability, who's there on the defensive line, you maybe are inclined to drop off a little bit. And of course, that means a less condensed team, more space for his teammates to progress the ball. And even if he isn't receiving a long ball or a through ball to send him through on goal, there is more time on the ball for his teammates in midfield, in defence, and more capability for Norwich to pass the ball around teams, as was actually their weakness maybe in that Preston game where they didn't know whether to go or to drop off. And Sargent does really provide that threat. So it's going to be difficult without him once again against Sheffield Wednesday, but there were plenty of positive signs against Cardiff before that late comeback. Torup will hope to see more of them and maybe less of the latter against Sheffield Wednesday. And of course, we'll have everything from that game covered across our channels. So go to pinkun.com/subscribe and you'll have access to all of it. Thank you very much for joining me on Tactics Board. I'll see you again before the Bristol City game, and hopefully we are talking retrospectively about a first win in 5 for Norwich. See you soon.